The twin sons of Zerath scorched the vermilion sand, casting dual shadows that stretched like accusing fingers across the desert floor. Commander Vasha stood at the edge of the crimson plateau, her cobalt scales shimmering in the relentless heat. The ancestral sword hung at her hip, its polished hilt worn smooth by generations of her bloodline's hands. She was the pride of the Blood Cloud Regiment, the youngest ever to lead the elite Zerathi warriors into the Eastern Territories. Wind whipped her long braided hair, each strand adorned with battle tokens, small metallic discs that sang with every movement. To a Zerathi, one's hair was one's honor made manifest. Length spoke of years undefeated, decorations told of triumphs earned, and one's name spoken in full by allies and enemies alike was the recognition of existence itself. Vasha adjusted her ceremonial armor, the plates clicking together as she straightened her spine. Below, the captured Earthling expedition knelt in the sand, surrounded by her regiment. The prisoners' pale skin had blistered under Zerath's merciless suns, their strange clothing tattered from weeks of captivity. The Council's orders had been explicit public execution, as warning to all human incursions into Zerathi territory. Commander Vasha of the Blood Cloud intoned, Warlord Krytos, his massive frame silhouetted against the burning sky. Carry out the Supreme Council's decree. Let the blade of your ancestors taste earthblood and demonstrate the consequence of trespass. The assembled crowd fell silent. 100 Zerathi warriors' scales, gleaming in shades of blue and green and purple, watched with unwavering attention. This was more than an execution. It was ritual tradition, the cornerstone of their society for 10,000 years. Vasha descended the stone steps, each footfall echoing in the silence. The human captives trembled, all save one, a tall figure, with eyes the color of Zerath's shallow seas. There was defiance there, but also something else. Understanding. As if this human comprehended what was being asked of Vasha. Her hand closed around her sword's hilt, feeling the familiar curves that had been polished by her mother and her mother's mother back through 17 generations. The blade whispered from its scabbard, catching the light of both suns simultaneously, a good omen typically. The Earthling knelt, neck exposed. Vasha raised her sword and hesitated. The whisper began at the edges of the assembly. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the ranks of the Blood Cloud Regiment. Commander Vasha, undefeated in 47 battles, hesitated. A capital offense against both council and culture. I have seen this one in battle, Vasha announced, her voice carrying across the plateau. They fought with honor when we ambushed their expedition. They protected their weaker companions at cost to themselves. She lowered her blade, turning to face Warlord Krytos. There is no glory in executing the honorable. I request clemency. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the desert winds seemed to hold their breath. Warlord Krytos' expression didn't change, but his inner eyelids flickered, a sign of rage among the Zerathi. You defy the Council's direct order. I uphold the deeper honor of the Zerathi, Vasha countered, standing her ground. Our ancestors did not build our civilization by slaughtering those who showed courage. We respected worthy opponents. Krytos stepped forward, his ceremonial cape billowing behind him, like spilled blood across the sand. You speak of honor while defying your oath. Interesting interpretation, Commander. He gestured to the royal guard. Seize her weapons. Prepare the ceremony of dishonor. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. The ceremony of dishonor hadn't been performed on a commander in living memory. Vasha did not resist as warriors approached. One by one, they removed her badges of rank. Her ceremonial armor was stripped away, plate by plate. Last came her ancestral sword. The warrior who took it couldn't meet her eyes as his hands closed around the scabbard. By order of the Supreme Council of Zerath, Krytos proclaimed, voice echoing across the plateau. Commander Vasha of the Blood Cloud Regiment is hereby stripped of rank, title, and honor. Let the ceremony begin. 4 warriors held her still, while another approached with a ceremonial blade. With 3 swift cuts, Her braided hair, 17 years in the growing, adorned with tokens from every victory, fell to the sand. Each severed strand represented a connection broken, an achievement erased. From this moment, Krytos continued, your name shall not be spoken. You are nameless, honorless, clanless, exiled to the far wastes, until the twin suns consume themselves, or you perish whichever comes first. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper meant for her alone. Political miscalculation, Commander. I've waited for you to falter. As final humiliation, her ancestral sword was broken blade, from hilt the metal shrieking, as if in pain. The two pieces were tossed at her feet. Take them, Krytos said, a reminder of what you've lost. The shattered sword and cut hair were all she was permitted to carry into exile. As tradition dictated, she was given one water skin enough for perhaps 3 days in the merciless desert, and released into the far wastes as the twin suns began their descent. Vasha. No, not Vasha anymore, she corrected herself bitterly. The nameless one walked into the crimson desert, refusing to look back at the city that had been her home. Pride was all she had left. That, and the broken pieces of a sword she could no longer wield. When night fell across Zerath, bringing temperatures that plummeted from scorching to freezing, she made her first camp beneath an outcropping of crystal formations. Using her military training, she dug into the sand for residual heat, creating a shallow depression that would insulate her through the night. The sky above blazed with unfamiliar stars. She had never ventured this far into the wastes. In the privacy of darkness, she allowed herself to examine the broken sword. The blade, separated from its hilt, had fractured unevenly. An ugly, jagged line where once had been perfect craftsmanship. Like her life. Like her honor. Am I still myself? She whispered to the desert night, the first time she had given voice to the fear gnawing at her core. The Zerathi believed that name and honor were inseparable from identity. Without them, what remained? A shell, a shadow. She clutched the broken pieces of the sword against her chest, feeling the cold metal warm against her scales. Without her braided hair, her head felt unnaturally light, exposed. Vulnerable. She ran a hand over the short, ragged remains, another indignity. The ceremonial blade had not made clean cuts. Sleep evaded her that night, and she watched as Zerath's smaller sun began its ascent, painting the crystal formations in bloody light. Day 1 of exile had begun. By midday, thirst became her constant companion. The ceremony of dishonor was not intended for survival. It was a slower, more dignified execution than a blade to the neck, but an execution nonetheless. The far wastes were said to be devoid of water sources, inhabited only by the most dangerous of Zerath's predators. Perfect for disposing of political inconveniences, she thought bitterly. She rationed her water carefully, taking only enough to wet her lips and throat. Each drop was precious, each swallow a calculation. Her military training had prepared her for survival situations, but even the toughest Zerathi warrior would succumb to dehydration eventually. As she crested a dune, something caught her eye, a metallic glint, incongruous, among the endless red sands. Approaching cautiously, she discovered the remnants of an ancient expedition. The sand had preserved much of it, a small, broken vessel of unfamiliar design, partially buried. Not Zerathi, the craftsmanship was wrong. Possibly human, or from another spacefaring race. Investigating further, she found skeletal remains that had been picked clean by time and scavengers. Among the ruins, something sparked recognition. Inlaid in what appeared to be a control panel was a pattern of metal work that reminded her of her ancestral sword's hilt. The same swirling patterns, the same attention to both function and beauty. She pried loose a small section of the metalwork, examining it under the harsh sunlight. The material was strange, lighter than Zerathi metals, yet seemingly as strong. Perhaps useful, though, for what purpose she couldn't yet determine. That night, huddled again in a makeshift shelter, she held the piece of alien metal alongside her broken sword. The designs weren't identical, but they shared a philosophy of craftsmanship that transcended worlds. It was a small comfort, but in the wasteland, small comforts were all that existed. Her water ran out on the fourth day. By the fifth day, hallucinations began. The dunes seemed to shift and whisper. The twin suns multiplied in her vision, becoming 4, then 6 burning orbs that pursued her across the sky. Her scales, normally lustrous and smooth, began to crack and flake. Dehydration was setting in, and with it the beginning of the end. She stumbled, more than walked now, dragging herself forward by instinct rather than purpose. The broken sword and scrap of alien metal had become talismans clutched in her fist, as if they could somehow save her. Rational thought ebbed and flowed, sometimes leaving her clear-headed enough to recognize her approaching death, sometimes plunging her into feverish delusions. It was during one such moment of clarity that she heard a sound that didn't belong in the desert. A voice, human words unintelligible but unmistakably a cry for help. At first she assumed it was another hallucination, but the cry came again, more desperate this time. Real. Forcing her body to move, she changed direction, following the sound over a large dune. There, in a shallow depression, much like her own nightly shelters, lay an earthling. It took her a moment to recognize the figure as the very prisoner she had refused to execute, the one with sea-colored eyes. Somehow they too had been released or escaped into the far wastes. The human was in worse condition than she was, having none of the natural adaptations that allowed Zarathi to survive in extreme heat. Their skin had blistered severely, peeling away in sheets. Their lips were cracked to bleeding. Death was written in every labored breath. For a long moment, she simply watched. Here was the cause of her dishonor, her exile, her approaching death. Here was an enemy of her people. It would be simple to let nature take its course. Within hours, the human would be dead, and she could continue her own doomed journey with one less burden on her conscience. But something in those sea-colored eyes sparked recognition, not of the person, but of the situation. Both of them cast out, both of them facing death alone in an unforgiving land. With a resigned sigh, she approached. The human flinched, clearly recognizing her, despite her shorn hair and diminished appearance. "You," they croaked in thickly accented Zarathi. "Sword, not fall." It took her a moment to understand. The human was referring to the execution ceremony, when Vasha's sword had not fallen upon their neck. "I am nameless now," she replied in the trade language most spacefaring races understood. "Because of you." The human struggled to sit up, failing. "Alex," they said, tapping their chest weakly. "Lieutenant Alex Ryder, Earth Expeditionary Force." A pause, then with visible effort. "Thank you, for mercy." She shouldn't have understood that final concept. Mercy was not a word that existed in the Zarathi language. The closest approximation was tactical restraint, or perhaps strategic preservation. But somehow, she grasped the human's meaning, and it stirred something uncomfortable within her. "Your gratitude is meaningless," she replied coldly. "We both die here." Alex's cracked lips formed something resembling a smile. "Maybe not." With trembling hands, they reached into a pocket and withdrew a small device. Map. Found in camp. Shows. Ancient forge station. Water recyclers. Maybe still work. Suspicion warred with desperate hope. "Why share this with me? I am Zarathi. My people imprisoned yours." "You," Alex pointed weakly at her, "not them. You showed—" They struggled for the word honor. The word struck like a physical blow. Honor. The very thing she had lost, given back to her by an alien who should by all rights despise her. She examined the device Alex held out. It was indeed a map, though the technology was unfamiliar. It showed their current position, and some distance away, a structure labeled in human script. Alex pressed a button, and the script changed to Zarathi characters, Ancient Forge Station. "I know this place," she said, memory stirring. "From military histories. Abandoned in the Great Retreat 3 centuries ago. A weapons manufacturing outpost. She looked at Alex with new calculation. If it exists, it would have water recycling systems. Possibly functional. 3 days, Alex managed. Walk. In her current condition with no water, the journey would be impossible. For the human, even more so. But the alternative was certain death where they sat. "Why should I help you reach it?" she asked. "You can barely stand." Alex's sea-colored eyes met hers steadily. "I know Earth Tech. Can fix recyclers if broken. You know route. Desert survival. A weak cough. Need each other." The logic was undeniable. Alone, neither would survive to reach the forge station. Together, the impossible merely became improbable. "Vasha," she said after a long moment, the forbidden sound of her own name strange on her tongue. "I was called Vasha." It was the closest thing to an agreement she could offer. Using scraps from Alex's tattered expedition uniform and pieces of her own ceremonial garb that had been permitted during her exile, she fashioned a rough covering to protect the human from the worst of the sun's rays. For herself, she created a head covering to shield her sensitive scalp, exposed without her long hair. They began their journey as the smaller sun set, leaving only the larger to torment them. Moving at night would have been wiser, but they couldn't risk missing landmarks essential to finding the forge station. The pace was excruciatingly slow. Every few steps she had to stop and wait for Alex to catch up or, worse, drag the human when they stumbled. By midday, hallucinations threatened again. The horizon shimmered and danced. Phantom pools of water appeared and disappeared. She found herself speaking to people who weren't there, her mother Krytos soldiers from her regiment. Alex was no better mumbling in earth tongue to invisible companions. Just as collapse seemed imminent, they stumbled upon unexpected salvation, a granife cactus, one of the rare desert plants that stored water in its fibrous core. She used the sharp edge of her broken sword blade to slice it open, revealing the moist pulp inside. "Drink," she instructed Alex, showing how to suck the moisture from the plant's flesh. "Slowly. Too much will make you sick." The water from the cactus was bitter and astringent, but it was enough to pull them back from death's edge. With clearer minds, they continued their desperate march toward the coordinates shown on Alex's device. As night fell, bringing sweet relief from the heat, Alex spoke again. His voice was stronger now, though still rough from dehydration. "Why did you do it? Refuse to kill me." She walked in silence for several paces before answering. "Our ways are ancient, built for a harsher time. But some traditions..." She struggled to articulate thoughts that felt treasonous, even now. Some traditions should evolve. "Your people cut your hair, broke your sword." Alex gestured to the items she carried. "Because you showed compassion." Again, that alien concept. "Compassion is weakness to the Zarathi," she said automatically, then paused. "At least that is what we are taught." "And what do you believe?" The question haunted her through the night. What did she believe before her exile? She would have given the textbook response that a warrior's only virtue is strength, that mercy is a luxury for the weak. But here, walking side by side with an alien, she had been ordered to kill. Those certainties felt hollow. Dawn broke on the second day of their journey, revealing a changed landscape. The endless dunes gave way to a vast salt flat, the ancient bed of a sea that had dried up millennia ago. The footing was firmer, allowing them to move faster, but the heat reflecting off the white surface was nearly unbearable. Halfway across the flat, disaster struck. The sky darkened without warning as a massive dust storm approached from the south, a swirling wall of red sand that obscured everything in its path. Such storms were legendary for their destructive power, capable of stripping flesh from bone. "We can't outrun it," she shouted over the rising wind. "Down, get down." She pulled Alex to the ground, positioning their bodies so that her larger frame shielded the human. From her military pack, she extracted a thin, emergency thermal sheet, one of the few supplies she'd been allowed in exile. Spreading it over them both, she secured the edges with their bodies and what little gear they had. "Don't move," she instructed, as the first particles of sand began to sting exposed skin. Breathe through fabric, conserve moisture. The storm hit with the force of a planetary bombardment. The thermal sheet snapped and billowed, threatening to tear away. Sand found every opening, filling ears, nostrils, the corners of eyes. The temperature beneath their makeshift shelter rose to suffocating levels as hot wind battered them from all sides. Through it all, she held position, using her body to anchor the sheet and protect the more vulnerable human. Hours passed in a red haze of pain and endurance. When consciousness began to slip, she forced herself to focus on the weight of the broken sword at her hip, the symbol of all she had lost, and perhaps what she might yet become. When the storm finally passed, leaving them half buried in new sand, they emerged into an alien landscape. The salt flat was gone, replaced by fresh dunes and altered horizons. Alex's navigation device flickered uncertainly. "We're off course," the human said, tapping the device. "Storm interference. Need to recalibrate." While Alex worked with the technology, she climbed the nearest dune to scout their position. From the peak, an incredible sight greeted her: a crystal forest stretched across the desert, massive formations that rose like translucent trees, capturing and refracting the sunlight into rainbows that danced across the sand. "Alex," she called down, "we're closer than we thought. The crystal groves appear on old military maps. The forge station lies just beyond." Hope renewed their strength. They navigated the crystal groves with caution. The formations were as beautiful as they were deadly, with edges sharp enough to slice through scales and skin. The temperature dropped noticeably in their shadow, providing blessed relief from the twin suns. It was Alex who spotted them first, dark shapes moving against the horizon. Flying creatures with wingspans wider than a Zarathi, was tall, circling in patterns too regular to be natural. "Scout drones," she whispered, pulling Alex behind a crystal formation. "Crimson Hunt Riders, Krytus's personal guard." "They're looking for us," Alex asked, voice hushed. "For you," she corrected. "A human escaped prisoner, valuable for interrogation." She didn't add that finding her would be a bonus proof that the ceremony of dishonor had failed in its purpose. "What do we do?" She studied the flying shapes, recognizing the pattern of their search grid. "They're scanning for heat signatures. Human body temperature is higher than Zarathi. You'll stand out like a beacon." Alex considered this, then reached for the navigation device. With quick movements, they pried off the back panel and extracted a small component. Cooling module, used for calibration in different planetary environments. They pressed it against their neck. "Won't last long, but might mask my signature temporarily." She nodded, impressed, despite herself. "We wait until the smaller sun sets. The crystal absorbs heat during the day, releases it at night. The interference should help confuse their sensors." As they waited pressed against cool crystal, Alex's gaze fell on the broken sword she carried. "Your weapon. It means something special." She clutched the pieces tighter. 17 generations, passed from mother to daughter. The metal, it's rare, found only in the northern ranges. Can't be replicated. "Just the hilt is intact," Alex observed. "But the blade could be reforged, with the right materials." "Impossible. The knowledge is lost, and no other metal would bond with it." Alex was silent for a moment. "On Earth we have something called titanium alloy, compatible with many metals, stronger than steel." A thoughtful pause. "The forge station might have similar materials. Earth and Zarath had trade relations once before the wars." The suggestion kindled a dangerous spark of hope. She had carried the broken sword as a reminder of failure, not with any expectation of restoration. But if there was even a chance— "First we survive," she said firmly, suppressing the hope before it could take root. "Then we consider impossibilities." As the smaller sun dipped below the horizon, they made their move. The heat sensors of the scout drones would be at their least effective during the transition from day to night, when the desert released its stored warmth in shimmering waves. They kept to the shadows of the crystal formations, moving quickly but carefully. The makeshift cooling device on Alex's neck had begun to fail, the human's natural body heat reasserting itself. They would have only minutes before the drones could distinguish them from background radiation. At the edge of the crystal groves stood their destination, a massive structure, half buried in sand, its angular architecture unmistakably Zarathi in design. The ancient Forge Station. Once a key military installation, now abandoned to the desert for centuries. Scout drones swept overhead as they made a final dash across open ground. The entrance was sealed, great metal doors locked against the encroaching sand. Alex examined the control panel while she kept watch for pursuers. Primitive by our standards, Alex muttered, fingers working quickly. But still functional. Power cells must be self-regenerating. A series of beeps, and the door slid open with a groan of protesting metal. Inside quickly. They slipped through the narrowest of openings, the door grinding shut behind them. Darkness enveloped them completely, broken only by the dim light of Alex's navigation device. There should be emergency lighting, she said, feeling her way along a wall. Standard military protocol. As if in response, dim red lights flickered to life along the ceiling, revealing a cavernous entrance hall. Dust and sand had infiltrated every surface, but the basic structure remained intact. Corridors branched off in multiple directions, leading deeper into the complex. Water recycling would be in the central maintenance hub, she said, recalling military schematics. This way. They moved cautiously through the abandoned facility, alert for any signs of danger. The air grew noticeably cooler and damper as they penetrated deeper into the complex, a promising sign that environmental systems might still function. The maintenance hub was a cathedral-like space filled with massive machinery, most of it dormant, but seemingly undamaged. At its center stood the water recycling system, a monumental construction of pipes, filters, and condensation chambers that extracted moisture from the desert air and purified it for use. Alex approached it with reverence and professional interest. Beautiful engineering, advanced for its time. Hands moved over control panels, testing responses. It's in standby mode, conserving power. A few quick adjustments, and a deep humming filled the chamber. There. Water production will be slow at first, but steady. As if to confirm Alex's words, a small trickle of clear water emerged from an output pipe, splashing into a collection basin. The sight of it, clean, fresh water, hit her with unexpected emotional force. Survival. They would survive. Alex filled a canteen from the basin, offering it to her first. Commander Vasha, you should drink. The use of her forbidden name and rank startled her. I am neither Commander nor Vasha anymore, she said automatically, even as she accepted the water. You are who you choose to be, Alex replied. Names can be taken, identity cannot. She drank deeply, feeling the cool water revive her body and spirit. When she handed the canteen back, their fingers brushed scales against smooth skin, alien to alien. Yet in that moment, the gulf between their species seemed less vast than the one between her and Warlord Krytos. Rest, she said. Tomorrow we see what else this place has to offer. For the first time in days, they slept without fear of death by dehydration. The Forge Station's environmental systems maintained a comfortable temperature, and the steady hum of machinery provided a strange lullaby. She dreamed of her mother, of receiving the ancestral sword on her naming day. In the dream, the blade was whole and gleaming. She woke to find Alex already active, exploring the facility with methodical curiosity. The human had discovered food stores, military rations preserved through advanced technology, and still edible despite centuries of abandonment. Not delicious, but sustaining. I found something else, Alex said as they ate. A manufacturing section with material storage, including these. The human placed several small metal ingots on the table between them. They gleamed with a silvery blue luster, unlike any Zarathi metal she had seen. Titanium alloy, Alex explained. Earth manufactured based on the markings. Part of trade goods, I'd guess. Before relations soured. A significant look. Metal that can bond with almost anything. She stared at the ingots, then at the broken pieces of her sword that never left her side. You think it's possible? I think we can try, Alex replied. The forges here are cold, but with enough power rerouted from the recycling systems. You know metallurgy, she asked skeptically. Basic engineering training. Enough to operate the systems if they're still functional. Alex smiled slightly. And you, any Zarathi commander expertise in swordsmithing? She found herself returning the smile, the expression strange after days of grimness. Some. Part of our heritage education. Ceremonial more than practical. But I understand the principles. They spent the day exploring the forge station, thoroughly mapping its extent and cataloging useful resources. The facility was vast, designed to house and equip an entire division of Zarathi warriors. Most sections remained in surprisingly good condition, preserved by desert air and isolation. In the communications center, Alex made a discovery that changed everything. The long-range transmitters are intact. If we restore power, we could send a signal. To whom? She asked. Your Earth forces would shoot me on sight. My people would execute us both. Alex's expression turned contemplative. There are neutral outposts, trading stations, places where species coexist. The human hesitated. But first we need to deal with those hunt riders outside. They'll be scanning for power signatures. Once we fire up the forge, they'll know exactly where we are, she finished grimly, and they'll come in force. So we prepare, Alex said with surprising resolve. This is a military installation. There must be defenses we can utilize. She nodded slowly, military training reasserting itself. Perimeter alarms, defensive positions, perhaps even functional weapons. And I have an idea about those heat sensors, Alex added. If we can access the climate control systems, we could create a thermal smokescreen, make the entire complex read as a uniform temperature. Working together, they formulated a plan that utilized their complementary knowledge. She understood the layout and defensive capabilities of Zarathi military installations. Alex grasped the technical aspects of repurposing systems for new functions. By nightfall, they had transformed the abandoned forge station into a formidable stronghold. Tomorrow, she said as they surveyed their work, we reforge the sword, and then we face whatever comes. The main forge chamber was imposing a space designed for the creation of weapons on an industrial scale. They had redirected power to the smallest of the forges, sufficient for their needs without drawing excessive attention from outside sensors. She placed the broken pieces of her ancestral sword on the workbench. The blade and hilt, separated by Krytos' ceremonial breaking, seemed like irreconcilable pieces of different puzzles. Yet, as Alex laid the titanium alloy ingots beside them, possibility flickered to life. The technique is called mokumegane on Earth. Alex explained, configuring the forge controls, layering different metals to create both strength and beauty. The titanium will form a binding layer between the broken pieces, but your sword's original metal will remain the primary component. She nodded, understanding. Not a replacement, a healing. The work was painstaking and precise. Hours passed as they heated, folded, and shaped the metals. The ancestral sword resisted at first its ancient material, reluctant to bond with the alien titanium. But gradually, under their persistent efforts, a union began to form. The distinctive whine of scout drones passing overhead punctuated their work. The hunt riders were still searching patterns, growing more concentrated. Time was running short. There, Alex said, finally stepping back from the bench. It needs to cool slowly. Controlled cooling preserves the molecular bonds. They looked down at their creation. The sword was transformed. Where once had been a clean, traditional Zarathi design, now ran a rippling pattern where titanium and ancestral metal met. The breakpoint was visible, a silvery blue line that encircled the blade, but instead of weakness, it conveyed a strange beauty. A story written in metal. It's different, she said softly, not yet touching it. It's stronger, Alex replied. The titanium reinforces the original metal. It will never break at that point again. As the sword cooled, alarm sensors throughout the complex suddenly activated. Lights flashed, and a low-pitched warning tone filled the corridors. "They've found us," she said, moving quickly to a monitoring station. "Heat signatures surrounding the complex. At least 20 hunt riders." She studied the tactical display. "They're preparing for breaching operations. We have minutes at most." Alex joined, her face grim. "The thermal smokescreen is ready, and I've rigged the external sensors to feedback loops, should confuse their targeting systems temporarily." She nodded, military commander instincts, fully engaged despite her exile. "Activate both, then fall back to defensive position 3. The narrow corridor will funnel their approach." As Alex hurried to implement their countermeasures, she returned to the cooling sword. It wasn't fully ready ideally. It would have hours more to stabilize. But necessity overrode metallurgical best practices. Using heat-resistant gloves, she carefully lifted the reforged weapon. It felt different in her hand, the balance altered by the addition of titanium, the grip unfamiliar after its reconstruction. Yet, somehow it also felt right, like her own transformation made manifest in metal. She found Alex in the designated defensive position, final preparations underway. Outside, the initial explosions of breaching charges reverberated through the complex's structure. The hunt riders were coming. "Your sword," Alex said, noticing the weapon in her hand. "Will it hold?" She tested the blade's edge with her thumb, drawing a thin line of blood. "We'll find out soon enough." The first riders breached the outer doors within minutes. Elite warriors in crimson armor, they moved with practiced precision through the facility's corridors. But the defenders had prepared well. Remote-triggered traps delayed their advance. Thermal smokescreen confused their sensors. Redirected cooling systems created patches of ice on metal floors, causing pursuit to literally stumble. Still, the riders pressed forward, their superior numbers gradually overwhelming the defenses. She and Alex fell back according to plan, yielding ground strategically, while maintaining maximum tactical advantage. "The main forge chamber," she said, as they retreated from yet another position. "High ground, limited access points, backup power generators." They made their stand there among the ancient forges, where Zarathi weapons had once been mass-produced for interstellar conquest. How fitting, she thought, that her last battle would be fought in such a place. The hunt riders burst into the chamber in formation, weapons drawn. At their head strode a familiar figure, Warlord Krytos himself, his massive frame encased in ceremonial combat armor. "The Nameless One," he called, using the formal title of those who underwent the ceremony of dishonor. And the earth filth she chose over her own people. How touching. She raised the reforged sword, its distinctive pattern catching the light. "I have a name, Krytos." "Not one that may be spoken," he replied coldly. Then, his gaze focused on the weapon in her hand. "Abomination! You dare reforge the blade with alien metal." His inner eyelids flickered with disgust. "Defiling your ancestors' legacy further." "Adapting it," she countered. "As our people should adapt." Kratos laughed, a harsh sound, entirely without humor. Philosophical to the end. Admirable if misguided. He drew his own weapon, a massive war blade designed more for intimidation than efficiency. "I'll make this quick. A courtesy for your past service." The battle erupted with explosive violence. Hunt riders closed in from multiple angles, while Krytos engaged her directly, his greater size and strength nearly overwhelming. Alex fought defensively, using the human's smaller stature and quickness to advantage against the heavily armored Zarathi warriors. Her reforged sword sang through the air, lighter than before, faster. The titanium alloy had indeed strengthened the blade, allowing it to parry blows that would have shattered lesser weapons. Each impact sent vibrations up her arm, but the sword held. "You fight well for one without honor," Krytos growled as they locked blades. "Imagine what you might have accomplished had you simply followed orders." "I kept my true honor," she replied, disengaging with a twist that nearly caught him off guard. "The kind you've forgotten." Across the chamber, Alex had been cornered by 3 riders. She couldn't reach the human in time. But as she watched, Alex activated something on a nearby control panel, and the floor beneath the riders suddenly superheated their armor sensors, screaming warnings. The momentary distraction was enough for Alex to slip past them and reach another control station. "The inscriptions!" Alex shouted over the din of battle. "On your sword hilt, I've decoded them." A strange moment to mention ancient writing, she thought as she parried another of Krytos' powerful blows. The sword hilt had always borne inscriptions in Old Zarathi, so worn with age that none in her family could still read them. "They don't say what you think," Alex continued, fingers flying over controls while dodging rider attacks. "Not victory through strength as your people translated it. The actual phrase is strength through compassion." The revelation struck her like a physical blow. Generations of her family bearing a sword whose true meaning had been lost or deliberately obscured. A philosophy at odds with everything modern Zarathi culture espoused. Krytos took advantage of her momentary distraction, his blade slicing across her arm. "Lies," he snarled. "Earth-filth manipulations." The linguistics match pre-unification dialect patterns. Alex insisted, evading capture with desperate agility. Your own historical archives would confirm it, if you bothered to look beyond military doctrine. She retreated, mind racing. If true, it would mean her instinctive refusal to execute Alex had aligned more closely with her ancestors' values than all of Krytos' rigid traditionalism. A cosmic irony. Blood dripped from her wounded arm as she circled Krytos cautiously. The chamber had become a chaos of individual combat, hunt riders engaging in close quarters with desperate defenders. Alex had somehow managed to reach her side, breathing hard from exertion. "System overrides in place," the human whispered. "On my signal, drop to the floor." She gave the slightest nod of acknowledgement, never taking her eyes off Krytos. The warlord advanced with supreme confidence, his massive frame blocking escape routes. "Enough of this farce," he declared. "Surrender the human, renounce your heresy, and perhaps the council will show mercy. Exile rather than execution." "Interesting offer," she replied, shifting her stance. "But I've grown rather fond of my heresies." "Signal!" Alex shouted suddenly. She dropped flat as programmed lighting throughout the chamber flared to blinding intensity. Simultaneously, environmental controls fluctuated wildly, temperature plummeting, then soaring in cycles designed to confuse sensor-dependent armor systems. Krytos bellowed in rage and disorientation as his helmet's protection sealed automatically, blocking his vision momentarily. It was all the advantage she needed. Rising with fluid grace, she struck not with lethal intent, but with precision, her reforged blade slicing through key points in Krytos' armor, disabling rather than killing. The targeting systems, the power distribution nodes, the communication links. One by one, she systematically transformed his technological advantages into dead weight. Around the chamber, hunt riders struggled similarly, their coordination broken, their technological edge neutralized by Alex's systematic manipulation of the Forge Station's environmental systems. Krytos tore off his malfunctioning helmet, face contorted with rage. "Kill me and be done with it," he spat, as she held her blade to his throat. "It's what your ancestors would have done." She studied him for a long moment, the reforged sword steady in her hand. "No," she said finally, "it isn't." Stepping back, she lowered her weapon. "My ancestors understood that true strength comes from compassion, not cruelty. That wisdom was deliberately buried beneath centuries of military doctrine." She looked at the hunt riders, many of whom had ceased fighting to watch this exchange. How many other truths have been hidden from us? How many traditions corrupted to serve power rather than honor? "Treasonous drivel," Krytos snarled, but there was uncertainty in his eyes now. "Is it treason to return to our roots?" she challenged. "To honor the true meaning of our heritage?" She raised her sword, the titanium line catching the light. "This blade is stronger for its breaking and remaking, as our society could be." An unexpected voice spoke from among the hunt riders. "Commander Vasha speaks truth." Heads turned to a veteran rider, who stepped forward, removing his helmet. My grandmother was a historian before the purge of records. She spoke of ancient texts that contradicted official doctrine. Silence. Krytos ordered, but his authority was visibly eroding. Another writer stepped forward. The ceremony of dishonor was created during the military reformation, barely 2 centuries ago. Not an ancient tradition at all. The revelation spread through the assembled warriors like ripples in still water. Muted conversations broke out. Weapons lowered. The unified front of the Hunt Riders began to fracture along lines of doubt. Krytos, sensing the shift, made a desperate lunge for a fallen weapon. She intercepted him easily, using the flat of her blade to knock him back. "It's over, Krytos. Your political calculations have failed." With surprising dignity, the warlord straightened his posture. "Perhaps, but the council remains. This philosophical rebellion will be crushed before it spreads beyond this chamber." "Not if the council hears the truth," Alex interjected, approaching with caution. "The communication systems here are operational. A broadcast to all Zerath could reveal the historical manipulations." Hope and doubt warred in her mind. Could it really be so simple? Could words alone challenge centuries of cultural indoctrination? But looking at the Hunt Riders' elite warriors, now engaged in earnest discussion about their heritage, she realized change had already begun. The spark was lit. All it needed was fuel. "We make the broadcast," she decided. But first, she turned to Alex with newfound respect. "How did you decode the inscriptions on my sword? The language has been lost for generations." Alex smiled slightly. "Not lost, just forgotten by some. Earth xenolinguists have studied Old Zerathi for decades. Part of understanding potential allies or enemies." The humans' resourcefulness continued to impress her. In the short time they'd been allies, Alex had consistently demonstrated knowledge and skills that complemented her own. Together, they had accomplished what neither could have alone. With the Hunt Riders no longer an immediate threat, they proceeded to the communication center. Alex worked quickly to establish a planet-wide broadcast channel, while she prepared what she would say. The words needed to be perfect, challenging enough to provoke thought, yet respectful enough to be heard. Krytos and his most loyal followers were secured but not mistreated. True to her evolving understanding of Zerathi heritage, she showed them the compassion that her ancestors had apparently valued. When all was ready, she stood before the transmission array, reforged sword in hand. Alex gave the signal that they were broadcasting. "People of Zerath," she began, voice steady. "I am Commander Vasha of the Blood Cloud Regiment. I speak to you from the ancient forge station in the far wastes. Many of you witnessed my ceremony of dishonor. You were told I betrayed our ways by showing mercy to an enemy. Today I discovered that mercy, compassion, was the original virtue of our ancestors." She held up her sword, ensuring the camera captured the distinctive titanium line that marked its breaking and remaking. "Like this blade, our culture has been broken and remade. But unlike this blade, it was not strengthened by the change. Ancient wisdom was deliberately obscured, replaced with doctrines that served political ambitions, rather than our people's true heritage." For the next hour, she presented evidence Alex's linguistic analysis of the sword inscriptions, testimony from Hunt Riders, whose family histories contradicted official records, historical inconsistencies in the military code that only made sense if one assumed deliberate manipulation. "I do not call for revolution," she concluded. "I call for restoration. A return to what made Zerath truly great, not blind adherence to corrupted traditions, but the wisdom to know when compassion serves us better than cruelty, when adaptation strengthens rather than weakens." The broadcast ended. There was no way to gauge its immediate impact. The communication systems could transmit, but not easily receive responses. They would have to wait for physical reactions from the capital. "What now?" Alex asked, as they powered down the equipment. She considered the question carefully. "Now we rest and prepare. The Council will send forces either to silence us or to negotiate. We should be ready for either." The waiting period stretched from hours into days. They used the time productively, continuing to restore the Forge Station systems and establishing it as a defensible position. More importantly, they learned from each other, she teaching Alex Zarathi combat techniques adapted for human physiology. Alex sharing Earth technological approaches that could benefit Zarathi applications. The Hunt Riders, who had chosen to remain nearly half of Krytos' original force, integrated into this knowledge exchange. Ancient rivalries gave way to cautious cooperation in the isolated environment of the station. On the 7th day after the broadcast, sensors detected a massive approaching force. A full battalion of Zarathi military vessels, including the Council's ceremonial transport. Not an assassination squad then. Something more official. "They're hailing us," Alex reported from the communication station. She straightened her posture, adjusting the ceremonial garb she had pieced together from station supplies. The reforged sword hung at her hip. "Put them through." The screen flickered to life, revealing not a military commander, but the senior counselor herself, ancient respected, rarely seen outside the capital's inner sanctums. Commander Vasha, the counselor, said, using her name and title openly, a significant gesture. "Your broadcast has created quite the disturbance." "Truth often does, counselor." A thin smile crossed the elder's face. "Indeed. Our archivists have been working continuously since your transmission. Preliminary findings suggest your claims have merit." Hope flared, but she contained it. Politics were rarely so straightforward. "And Warlord Krytos' manipulations?" "Under investigation, as are similar actions by others in positions of influence." The counselor's expression hardened. "Corruption of heritage is a serious offense. More serious perhaps than showing mercy to an enemy." "Progress then, but how much?" "What does the council propose?" she asked carefully. "Your formal reinstatement for a start. The ceremony of dishonor to be publicly revoked." The counselor paused. "And your appointment as special envoy to Earth territories. Your unique perspective may prove valuable in reassessing our interspecies relations." Diplomatic language for a major policy shift. She glanced at Alex, who gave a subtle nod of approval. "And my human ally, the other enemy prisoners?" "Released with apologies and compensation for mistreatment. Lieutenant Ryder has been offered a similar liaison position by Earth authorities." The counselor's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've started something significant, Commander Vasha. Change will not come overnight nor without resistance. Are you prepared for that battle? It may prove more challenging than any you fought with that remarkable sword of yours." She considered the question seriously. The path ahead would indeed be difficult, challenging centuries of cultural momentum, navigating political minefields, balancing progress with respect for genuine traditions. "I am prepared," she said finally. "Not alone, but with allies who share the vision of what we can become." She rested her hand on the hilt of her reforged sword. "Like this blade, we are stronger at the broken places, if we have the wisdom to incorporate new elements without losing our essential nature." The counselor nodded approval, evident despite formal restraint. "We will arrive within the hour. Prepare for formal proceedings." When the transmission ended, she turned to find Alex watching her with an unreadable expression. "Envoy to Earth territories," the human said. "Quite a promotion from exile." "And you, will you accept your government's offer?" Alex smiled, gesturing around at the Forge station they had defended together. "After all this, how could I not? Besides, someone needs to keep you from starting interstellar incidents with your blunt Zarathi diplomacy." She found herself returning the smile, the expression becoming more natural with practice. "We make an effective team." "Stronger together," Alex agreed, glancing at the reforged sword. "Like titanium and Zarathi steel." As they prepared for the council's arrival, she took a moment to stand alone in the forge chamber, where they had remade her ancestral blade. The broken pieces had seemed beyond repair when she carried them into exile. Her honor, her identity, her purpose, all had seemed equally shattered. Yet here she stood whole again. Different, certainly. Changed in ways both visible and invisible. But stronger for the breaking. wiser for the journey, ready to forge something new from ancient truth and modern necessity. She ran a finger along the distinctive line where titanium met ancestral metal. Not a scar to be hidden, but a story to be told. Her story. Vasha's story. The story of honor lost and found again with help from the most unlikely of allies.